I will transition to our closing presentation and welcome Kathy Kelly to join us. Kathy will share our closing reflections for the series. For anyone who's just joining us now, thank you for coming in for Remote Control, Surveying Drones and Culture Today, our last few minutes that we will share with activist Kathy Kelly. Over the past 3 days, this symposium has brought together leading experts, artists, activists, academics, and practitioners across so many disciplines to think through the relationship between drones and drone warfare, arts, and culture today. And this past conversation that we've been in for the last 90 minutes has been no exception. To introduce Kathy, whom to many needs no introduction, Kathy Kelly's peace activism has led her to war zones and prisons over the past 35 years. She lived in Baghdad through the 2003 shock and awe bombing and in Gaza during the 2009 Operation Casualties. With Voices for Creative Nonviolence, she has visited Pakistan to interview victims of US drone attacks, and from 2010 to 2019 traveled 25 times to Afghanistan, where she and her companions learned from ordinary people about casualties of US war and occupation. Kathy, thank you for being here and for sharing this space with us. And please, we're happy to welcome you into your closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Melanie. And I want to say a sincere, earnest thank you to all of your colleagues and certainly to all of the people who have, I think, riveted us today in the attention to such important questions and bringing so much artistry and talent and wisdom to bear. So I feel a bit humbled, to be honest, to be in this position right now, wanting to help offer some summary of what we've heard. And I do think that it's important to try to reach back into the past artistry of people who wanted to grapple with some circumstances that are often very similar to the ones we face. And so I'd like to start with a slide that shows Peter Bruegel the Elder's depiction of what was entitled The Massacre of the Innocents. And it's a painting that bears lots of exploration, but you can see the gathering of the soldiers who are on horseback, and they have the upper hand, much as an Air Force would have the upper hand often in battles today. Those horses were almost like weapons, and there's a tremendous violence happening. People are in one part of the painting trying to smuggle a baby away from the soldiers. The soldiers are bursting into a building, but much of the violence that's going on in that painting was actually covered over, because as it happened, the painting was acquired by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II. And he didn't really like the idea of the military appearing to be so violent. So he had his painters cover over some of the slaughtered babies or the babies being attacked with paintings of birds or bundles or food parcels, so that it would look more as though the soldiers were engaging in plunder, but not massacre. And I suppose, we might look back at that effort by the Holy Roman Emperor and say, well, that was kind of clumsy, wasn't it? But much of what we've been learning in these days in this drone symposium has to do with the continued tendency to cover over the truth. And as we think about living in a time of permanent warfare, being in a permanent warfare state, one of the crucial ways to stop a next war is to tell the truth about this war. Only we're in multiple wars at the same time. So it certainly calls for a great deal of truth telling. And I believe that stories are our number one way to understand our realities, and that it is very, very important to try to see the stories of human beings who bear the brunt of our wars. And so another painting that it really has gripped many, many people is that of Francisco Goya, who drew a painting that was illustrating the events of the 3rd of May. And this painting, and I thank you, Melanie, for showing this next painting by Francisco Goya. There had been, under the Napoleonic Empire's reign in Spain and Madrid, an uprising, and it was a failed, defeated uprising. But the next day, hundreds of people, some of them maybe confirmed rebels, but others suspects, or others in the wrong place at the wrong time, were marched out beyond the city and they were executed. And so Goya drew this painting of a figure who almost seems perhaps like a crucifixion figure. The light shines on that figure, and the person who is the victim about to be killed certainly appears to be a very real human, whereas those bearing the weapons almost seem like a dehumanized group, like a big spider with a lot of legs. And so I think the idea of seeing people as real human beings is so very important. And this was captured, and thank you, Melanie, for showing the next image. This was captured by artists who depicted a little girl's very, very enlarged photo. You could see this from a drone above. And her parents had been killed by a drone strike. And the artist who kind of coordinated this depiction of the enlarged photo of the girl imposed on the field gave it a title, Not a Bug Splat. And in the military parlance for people that are killed by drones, there's been the tendency to call those people bug splat. So I think it's very crucial that we honor the ways that people in our time today can continue to try to emphasize the reality of human beings being affected by such mechanical warfare. And one person I'd like to draw attention to is Wafa Bailal. And Wafa Bailal, and sorry, we don't need to go to this picture just yet, but Wafa Bailal is a professor of art in New York City. And when I first had gotten to know him in Chicago, he was at the Art Institute of Chicago, and he devised a project in which he decided that he would place himself in a cubicle with a paint gun that could be remotely controlled by computers. Anybody who wanted to come into the project could control that gun. And his idea was that people could shoot him with the paintballs, or somebody could try to sort of redirect the paintball gun so that it wouldn't hit him. And over the course of 30 days, when he stayed in that cubicle, always at risk of being hit if he at all moved outside the frame of a kind of plastic shield, there were 60,000 efforts to shoot Wafa Bailal. And he wrote a book about that called Shoot an Iraqi. It must have been, quite a traumatizing 30 days, always to be a potential victim. But he undertook this in 2007 because his own brother had been killed by an aerial attack by the United States in 2005. And I would have thought, well, Wafa, you've made your contribution through this very compelling artwork. But not too many years later, he did another project, and this one was called And Counting. And he bared his back and had a tattoo artist tattoo on his bare back the names of all of the people who had been killed by aerial attacks in Iraq. And he also named US who had been killed, US soldiers. And the US names could be seen, but the other names required a kind of a black light. They were made invisible. But he bears on his back the names of all of those people. And so I think that we have the opportunities to try very hard to be much more accountable as ordinary human beings for what we pay for. You know, the United States people are called upon to pour resources, funds, ingenuity, problem solving into the coffers of the Pentagon, and they will constantly come up with yet another technological innovation so that the militarists constantly get the upper hand. And in Kabul, you would see anytime you stepped out in the city, anywhere, a huge surveillance blimp. There were 4 of them floating over the city, constantly pulling in surveillance, constantly spying on people. And of course, then there were also the many drones trying to find high value targets or ostensibly determining patterns of life in Afghanistan. Well, I would like to tell you about another kind of surveillance, which I think is very, very important to pay attention to. And that was undertaken by a group of teenagers, older teens, who lived in Kabul and who would go all the way up to the highest levels of a mountain on the outskirts of the city with spiral notebooks and pens. And they did surveys. They'd go into the very, very primitive hovel, really, of a widow who didn't have any steady income or no income. And they would ask questions. They'd ask, how many times a week, Madame, do you and your family eat beans? Because of course, nobody had meat. And what is your source of water? And how far do you have to walk to get it? And what is your rent? And who brings an income into this household? And if the answer to that last question was a child under the age of 12, then that survey sort of went to the top. And then these young friends had worked it out so that they were able to employ the widows to get at least a meager living wage, making what are called sometimes duvets, big, heavy, fleece-stuffed blankets. And I think almost every woman in Afghanistan knows how to make these. And then they'd collect those and they would distribute them free of charge to people living in refugee camps, where those kinds of blankets actually become life-saving. So I just want to share with you some pictures. Those are the women bringing their completed blankets to a center. And if we just scroll down a bit, the kids would hire a rickety old truck. I remember one time it fell over, but they'd pile the blankets on top of a truck and then take them to places where perhaps a local mosque might help to organize it, but they would be distributed amongst some of the people who couldn't possibly afford fuel, not coal, not wood. And so those blankets became life-saving. And these young people felt very proud of themselves. Well, my point is that drones can never, ever get that kind of information, can never disclose about the patterns of life that are so essential and so important to know about when the United States has invaded and caused so much destruction and suffering. I've heard for 20 years, a debacle unfolded in Afghanistan. And then, as Madea said, there's an ongoing theft and a huge theft going on even to this day as the resources of the people of Afghanistan are being stolen from them, and economic sanctions will impose so much misery that it's possible 1 million children will die this winter. The film National Bird, which Sonia Kennebec made, was so important in helping people get a grip on just how wrong the sort of confirmation bias, as Hina mentioned to us earlier, could be. And this has gone on for, of course, many years. In National Bird, there's a section that focuses on an attack that had happened on a convoy of Afghans who were going from the Daikhondi province to the Uruzgan province. They were headed to Kabul, and on their passenger convoy cars, inside those cars, they were actually carrying turkeys to bring to their relatives as gifts. But the drones picked up footage and determined in their analysis that those turkeys were guns. And it does make me think about Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II and the mistaken ways in which this confirmation bias, building up terror and fear of the enemy and the need to eliminate the enemy, actually creates so much more enmity and people who find that their lives will never ever again be the same. And one of the more recent instances, of course, where that confirmation bias developed was amongst the people who were the family members that are now Hina Shamsi's clients. Of course, I'm thinking of the family of Zemarai Ahmadi. And it's, I think, so important not to look away from that family, from actually their faces, because the only thing really unusual about the attack on that family was the fact that there were international journalists there who covered and disclosed and made evident the realities. Initially, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had actually said, well, this was a righteous strike. They wanted vengeance, and they had exacted it, and they wanted to say, no need to do too much more investigation. But because there were people there who could go and interview the survivors, we then have the faces. And so let us spend just a bit of time with the faces of Zemarai Ahmadi, age 43, the father of the family. And when he would drive his car, and I can say in all those trips to Afghanistan, I think I knew one person in this neighborhood where I always stayed who actually owned a car. And so if you had a car, you were likely doing lots of errands and tasks to help your neighbors. And it was his last day, he believed, in Kabul, because he thought he was going to the United States. And so, among the tasks were to bring canisters of water because there was a drought going on and so many people lack water. So he was stacking his car with canisters of water, which in the confirmation bias were mistaken as weapons. But let us not think that the 8 hours during which he was being followed should be characterized as fog of war. There were 8 hours of following Zemarai Ahmadi. And the tradition in his family, when he'd come back with the family car, was that he'd pull it into the courtyard and then allow one of his sons to park the car. And so all the kids would come out and giggle and squeal and point. And so as the drone analysts were focusing, there actually was a child visible. That this is the oldest son, Zamir, 20 years age, who was killed by that attack. And a younger son, Faisal, age 16. Farzad, age 10. And then Zemarai's brother was the father of 2 boys, Benjamin and Arwin, ages 6 and 7. And these are 3 little girls, Hayat, age 2, and Somaya and Malika, age 3. It's important not to look away. And yet the United States military's analysis of what happened said there was no wrongdoing done. General Sami Said was commissioned to do an investigation, the military investigating itself. And he said, you have to understand the context. And of course, he was thinking of the attack on the airport where 13 United States Marines were killed and over 170 Afghan civilians. And yes, this was a very, very troubling context. Indeed, it was a ghastly attack. But I believe we have to kind of step back and consider the wider, broader context of how much of a pattern has been established in the drone strikes, of how frequently the people who are killed are civilians who meant us no harm. And I think to best understand that, we have to listen to a drone whistleblower whom Sonia has so effectively portrayed, Daniel Hale. And Daniel Hale, I believe, should be thanked. He's now serving 4 years at the Marion Penitentiary, but he's just simply couldn't in conscience continue to know that innocent lives were being taken. In his sentencing statement, he said to the judge, I stole papers because I could no longer steal what was not mine to take, the lives of innocent people. And so projection artists put Daniel Hale's picture on the side of a Washington, D.C. building with the caption, "Pardon Daniel Hale." And really, I believe he ought to be thanked. I don't believe he's guilty of a crime. And in a way, how will we ever pardon ourselves for being so consistently ones who are accountable for continuing to fund the United States military and the debacles which it has caused? And so I was very pleased to hear the word abolish and think about abolition in relation to the United States militarism. We do live in a permanent warfare state. There was mention earlier in the day about the industrialized slaughter that World War I represented. And so I believe as we try to internationalize our efforts to put an end to war, it's very, very important to be in touch with people all throughout the world who have suffered the traumas of war. World War I, World War II ought not to be forgotten. And one of the things we can hope for is an international treaty to ban killer drones, much as we now have an international treaty, fortunately, to call for the abolition of nuclear weapons, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And so I do invite you all to be aware of the Ban Killer Drones campaign. And I will just take a quick look at the website that also has a petition that you could sign if you go to bankillerdrones.org, and I'll put that petition in the chat. But the closing that I'd like to offer actually does go back to World War I. And at the end of that war, there were some soldiers who apparently didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they just collapsed and fell back on their packs, put their weapons down, and certainly did not want to troop off to another war. And there's to me, a very gripping audio tape of the exact ending at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month of the year when World War I ended. And the audio tape presents just the sound of explosions. People kept firing up until the last minute. And so there are explosions and then there aren't. And then I ask you to listen very, very carefully, because you will hear an incredibly beautiful sound. So I want to thank Melanie for accompanying me in this presentation by having put the slides into a PowerPoint panel. And I also certainly want to thank Adrian for helping me by playing this audio tape. So at the very end, when the guns were finally silenced, you can hear the bird song. For those who might wish to go to the High Line and view Sandran's sculpture and also be engaged in activism, you'd be so welcome at 1 o'clock on Saturdays to join in leafleting and also distributing postcards to United States Secretary General Antonio Guterres, asking him to help support the effort to seek an international treaty to ban weaponized drones. And I certainly do wish everyone who's been part of this symposium the very best in our ongoing effort to become part of what I hope will become a dramatically increasing effort to put an end to war, all wars. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Coney, and I'm the Senior Director and Chief Curator of the Verily Center for Art and Politics at the New School, a co-sponsor of this symposium, Remote Control. Thank you, Kathy Kelly, for your beautiful, precise, and I have to say haunting closing remarks that so effectively cap the many conversations we've had over the past 3 days, offering as guides to what you call the reality of human beings, art, by Bruegel, Goya, Wafa Bilal, or the Children of Kabul. Thank you to all of the speakers who have shared their insights and expertise across so many topics: drone warfare, arts and culture created under the specter of drones, algorithms and their impact on contemporary conflicts, and our place in today's landscape of perpetual warfare, to bring a greater understanding of the realities and intersections of these topics. We are thrilled to have collaborated with our brilliant symposium co-organizers, Arthur Holland-Michael, Melanie Kress, and my colleague at the Verily Center, Ariola Pira. Thank you to all of our colleagues who have made this series possible: Constanza Valenzuela, Adrian Ume, Real Christian, and Camila Palomino, as well as the entire Highline Communications team. Thank you very much. And Melanie, please offer your closing reflections.
Thank you, Karen. And Kathy, to echo what Karen said, I cannot imagine a better closing to this event. So thank you so much for your thoughtful insights, bringing together art and all of the realities that we've heard about over the last 3 days. I am here to thank our supporters, the members of the Highland Plinth Committee, contemporary art leaders committed to realizing major commissions and engaging in the public success of the Plinth, and who have made this series and few days possible. Verily Center's participation in remote control is possible by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, Ford Foundation, and the Kettering Fund, as well as members of the Vera List Center Board and the New School. I also want to thank Arthur, who has joined us on this multi-year brainstorming and planning process, and who has made this all possible. Thank you to everyone here with us in the audience. The archive of recordings of these events will be made available as a resource on both of our websites in the coming weeks. To learn more about any of the projects happening at the Vera List Center and with the Highline, please visit the links in the chat. Take a look at what Kathy has left there as well. Come to see us on Saturdays coming up, and we will see you next time. Thank you all again. Be well.